Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon in the UK. Welcome to Feminist Question Time, which is brought to you by Women's Human Rights Campaign. Women's Human Rights Campaign is an international feminist organisation that promotes women's rights with a main focus on defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. You can find more about Women's Human Rights Campaign on our website, womensdeclaration.com, where you'll find our declaration on women's sex-based rights. Declaration has been signed by 13,599 people from 125 countries, and it's supported by 294 organisations so far. This week, for Feminist Question Time, which goes on for 90 minutes, I'm delighted to welcome Zohra Elias from Algeria, Lucía Mazarrasa from Spain, Ksenija Kordic from Croatia, Kathleen Lowrey from Canada, Raine McLeod from Canada, and Angela C. Wild from France and UK. Zohra Elias is from Algeria. She's a climate professional. She's a social activist and founder of Womanti, promoting education for girls and women in Algeria. So welcome to Feminist Question Time, Zohra. How do feminists get the message across about women's human rights in your country?
Although Algerian women played a key role in the war for independence from France, which lasted from 1954 to 1962, the battle for gender equality has been long overshadowed by the nationalist struggle. Since 1962, government officials have formally acknowledged women's central role in the construction of an independent nation. However, very few grassroots feminist organizations developed in the 1960s and 70s. Combatants in the independence struggle often argued that nationalist objectives were more pressing decision. Thank you. That's for the first question.
So our second question is, what role does religion play?
The National Liberation Front, which led the independent movement and remains the ruling party in Algeria, was largely ambivalent on ground issues. The social aspects of its ideological advocated women's equality, but more conservative strands within the movement viewed women as the vessels of Islamic and traditional values. However, some existing freedoms have been recently challenged, including religious freedom. The broader political conditions have also helped to obstruct progress. Thank you.
What are the biggest issues for women in Algeria?
The actual situation for Algerian women is complex and often ambiguous. Some religion discriminatory and should be replaced by secular civil laws. Groups last years showcases growing activism and civic involvement among women. However, the feminist movement continues to face challenges. Women's rights organizations are increasingly fragmented along ideological lines, and activists do not necessarily have strategy for achieving further advances. Thank you.
As you know, in the West and in many countries, there's a promotion of gender identity ideology. Are people promoting the transgender ideology in your country, in Algeria?
All citizens are entitled to equal access to justice, regardless of their gender, and women are fairly well represented in the judiciary as judges and lawyers. However, in practice, women typically either do not know their legal rights or refrain from asserting them through formal legal channels. This is particularly true regarding claims involving domestic violence, sexual harassment, and rape. The reluctance to pursue these claims can be attributed to several factors, including the real and perceived biases in the law and the ongoing prevalence of patriarchal attitudes in society.
Will you tell us about your organization, Womanti? Womanti?
Womanti is an organization that aims to promote education for girls and women in Algeria in particular, and in general in the Africa and MENA regions. It suggests different opportunities and resources to there are for girls and women in order to improve their skills and their knowledge.
We in the West, or in Western Europe, and many countries are having a new situation where men say that they are women, that they believe they are women because they have gender identity. Do you have that in Algeria?
The situation here in Algeria, as you said, is clearly not at that point. There are not people with different identity or people holding the women identity are really marginalized, and they don't identify themselves. The society doesn't accept them as persons, so they don't they are not recognized by people, so they are like overshadowed.
Yeah. Does the government recognize transgender ideology, the idea, or does the government not welcome this?
Unfortunately, the government doesn't recognize those people with transgenders in Algeria. As I said earlier, they are marginalized and they're living in small communities overshadowed.
Yeah. And how about lesbian and gay rights in Algeria? Is it possible to be openly lesbian or gay?
Unfortunately not. We cannot actually be to go to your gender. They are little bit marginalized.
So we're going to move on now to Lucía Mazarrasa, who's from Spain. She's an abolitionist and founder member of Fórum De Política Feminista. She's a retired nurse, public health educator, and former delegate to the 1995 Beijing UN Women's Conference. And Lucía is going to give us a report about her organization and the work she's involved in, and tell us about women's sex-based rights and issues in Spain.
Well, I will tell you about our organization. This organization was created in 1987 and has been working for more than 33 years already. It deals with various themes: the relationship of women and political, economic, and social power, and the negotiations equality. Also, we work with political measures to favor the employment and promotion of women, change to facilitate the conciliation of personal and working life, the debate on the welfare state or labor reform, along with the demand for equality and equal participation at all levels of decision making. Also, the fight against gender violence, abortion, the abolition of the prostitution are some of the items on which we work. All our members are volunteers. We are about 500 members around the country, and we have organization in several cities of the country. We work and organize workshops that we later disseminate among other associations through events and the publication of books. And I would like to highlight the workshop we did in the city of León on gender in 2019. We work about the feminist proposal for the abolition of the patriarchal gender system. And the subjects we talk about in this workshop was ethical, legal, health and economic repercussions, feminist proposal for the abolition of the patriarchal gender system, post-gender feminism and sexual transidentity, and the political subject of feminism. And also we discuss about the right-hand parties on the right-hand attacks against gender ideology. The offensive is going in the Cairo 25 and Beijing 25, which is very, very worrying for us. Well, we present these workshops all over the country. With the pandemic is not possible this year. But the books are in our web. Of course, they are in Spanish, but you can look at our web and you can find all our publications there. And I would like to talk a little bit about what is going on now in Spain with the proposition of law. The government is going to put in the Congress of Deputies. No, we have two laws. One is already proposed. It's a proposed draft organic law for integral guarantee of sexual freedom. It was this proposed draft approved already by the Council of Ministers in last March. There is another law which is not yet knowing what is going on. Is going to be called Law for the Full and Effective Equality of Trans People. I will talk later a little bit, if I have time, about the persecution of feminist radicals in the country and our participation in platforms defending women's human rights, if I have time. But I would start with the law, the organic law for integral guarantee of sexual freedom. We have criticized this law from the Fórum and other associations and women's, and we have criticized because the ambiguity and the contradiction this law has. In a way, is focused in guaranteeing the individual right to sexual freedom. But in another hand, the law focuses on sexual violence, adopting a gender approach. It highlights the violence suffered by women because of it. But in another hand, it's talking about guarantee of sexual violence, sexual freedom. There are contradictions because on one hand it refers to all persons, but in this position of reason, it refers to women, so that the object and purpose of the law should limit its object to the right to sexual freedom of women. Incoherence, no? In another way, there are contradictions because it speaks on the concept of gender identity or expression in some parts of the law, and in other parts it speaks about sexual orientation or identity. So the concepts that manage in the law are confusing all the time. No, they are mixed and confusing. The law tries to normalize the confusion, no, between the concepts. Gender identity or expression, sexual identity is intended to cover the group of trans people, but without selling clearly. People with female gender identities are included in the subjective scope of application. We are against this, no? Another thing we miss in this law is trafficking and prostitution is not considered at all in the law. Prostitution is sexual violence. So if we are talking about a sexual freedom, we should talk about prostitution and trafficking in this law. The law does not provide for this sexual violence, nor does pornography or pimping. So there is incoherence. We think it should include the prevention of prostitution. We don't agree that penalties will be lowered in all crimes about that, no? The current penalties are proportional already, and we have had a hard time having these offenses considered as serious crimes. And I think we think also it is imperative that the preventive and awareness raising action established by this law in the educational and institutional field explicitly includes awareness raising and prevention of the consumption of prostitution and pornography, especially in the articles aimed at digital communication and advertising. It's lacking of all these things. This is the principles criticism that we have done to the law, but still, as I tell you, this law it has to pass through the Congress of Deputies. It has to be discussed, and the other law gave us a lot of problem. Is the government wants to put on is the law for the full and effective equality of trans people. No. The Ministry of Equality has opened a procedure to collect opinions about the future law, but we don't know yet the official proposition. The Feminist, our organization, addressed our opinion to the Ministry based in the proposition of the law that Podemos, the political party Podemos, presented in 2018. But was dropped down at the moment because a period of acting government. But right now they wanted to alight this law. For us, it is in undisputed reality that the fact of being born with female sex has hurt us in all cultures and moments. She has marked us to give us a position in societies of a structural inequality. This for sure. For us, gender is a grammatical meaning and a method of analysis and evaluation of the different social situation of women and men. This is what we think is gender. But the Podemos party, which is in the coalition government nowadays, is very fond of queer theory or doctrine. The object of this law is intended for any person who wishes to exercise the right to free determination. Well, in Spain, according to the medical community, there are 10,000 people who are in this situation and who could be included in the scope of this law. And as we are 47 million people, it accounts for 0.02% of the population. Of course, in Spain there is already a law that allows there is a law that says the following: any person, this law is from 2007, and says any person of a Spanish nationality who is of a legal age and with sufficient capacity to do so may request the rectification of the registration mention of sex. But there are some requirements. The requirements are: the gender dysphoria has been diagnosed, that he has been medically treated for at least 2 years to accommodate his physical characteristics to those corresponding to the sex claim, and the need of the age of majority to carry out this process, 18 years in our country. But the Constitutional Court in 2019 amends this law and saying that to request the correction of the record mention of sex, provide that they are sufficiently mature for the minors, that provide they are sufficiently mature and in a stable situation of transsexuality. In Spain we have regional governments, 17 regional governments, and in the regional governments, there are 11 regional governments that have transgender law already. All this legislation enacted mostly between 2014 and today. He highlights the protection of the right to gender self-determination. So our situation is quite difficult. The law, the intention of the law is intended to configure the right to the free determination of sexual identity and gender expression based on the autonomy and freedom of each person to be and manifest their sex sense feelings without any interference or intrusion. We don't agree at all about this. We don't agree. We think it's not possible to make laws about feelings, no, about sense. In the law, they pretend that the desire and feeling of record or medical changes would not require the presentation of any evidence, would not be questioned, and at all times it will be considered and interpreted according to the manifestation of personal will. So the personal will is the only thing it's valid. It will also have consequences for those who deny, prevent, or do not respect the will of minors, in clear conflict with the right to parental authority. As you know, it would be undesirable consequences in very areas, in sport, in detention centers, in reserved quotas for women in electoral lists or jobs. We understand that terms such as gender identity or which gender does not refer to this patriarchal construction to perpetuate inequality, but to a form of identity building, and similar ones could contribute to those difficulties to the implementation of equality legislation. And also the law does references to women. We don't think reference to women should be replaced by concepts such as people with pregnant capacity or the like. Using the specific reference to women and sex disaggregated statistics is what has allowed to establish standards on parity, protection against gender-based violence, positive action, and equality planning. So the conclusion is maybe that we, the Fórum De Política Feminista, we want to work in this law, over these laws, and to complain about what they pretend, but also we still want to work in policies and measures to combat male violence in all areas, combating inequalities in employment, the wage gap, and inequality in working conditions, pensions, the feminization of poverty, and overall the economic rights of women. We think maybe this debate is overshadowing other issues for women, very important. Now, because maybe the time is gone, we have some, I will tell you about the persecution for hate crimes that they are suffering radical feminists in the networks, and not only the networks. For example, there is recently the president of the Feminist Party has been accused by a Catalan trans organization and by the Catalan Consejería of Equality. I think the Consejería is the ministry, the Catalan Ministry of Equality, of a hate crime in relation to an article published in a newspaper, where she defended that a woman is the female and the human being. She has been summoned by the persecutor's office for a hate crime and is in the process of being admitted or not. But the reality is that all the things are going very, very badly. Not only feminists and writers are also being persecuted and threatened on social networks, as well as boycotted in some online newspapers that regularly publish feminist women's opinion. So we are in this storm right now. And to end, I will tell you about our participation in platforms defending women's human rights based in sex, like the platform Feral Shadow, Istanbul and Beijing. We have a platform together with all these questions. We are also in the platform for the abolition of the prostitution. And in the last months, we are in a confluencia for the abolition of gender, which is very active right now in Spain. I think there is a division in the feminist movement. First of all, because of the abolition of the prostitution, and right now because the gender ideology, not the gender ideology, the queer ideology is working very hard at the universities also, in some departments of some universities, and they have a lot of and also some prestigious newspapers are supporting this, which is very, very dangerous.
So we're going to go to Ksenija from Kordic. She's from Croatia. She's a member of radical feminist group Femrevolt. She's Women's Human Rights Campaign country contact for Croatia. Could you tell us how Femrevolt was started and what you've been working on and what your work is now?
Regarding the Femrevolt, 4 of us founded it in 2015. And we are still, I think, the only nominally radical feminist group in all the area of former Yugoslavia. So I think this is very important. There are some radical feminists in other feminist organizations, and there are a lot of them here. But there is no organization that is exclusively radical feminist and based on the Radfem principles all along. Also, we are grassroots. We are just informal group for now, but we are planning to become what's the word? Sorry. We are planning to become formal organizations so that we can legally protect ourselves from the attacks that are started coming in our way since the last year, because regarding the Declaration of Women's Sex-Based Rights, we have published it on our website. So people can read it always and access it in Croatian, but there hasn't been any public discussion about it, and we are always being attacked for our stances on transgender rights from the other feminist organizations, and they mostly hold they hold all the websites that publish any feminist issues or feminist websites. So we can't have any. We don't have any venue to publish our views or to challenge them directly.
Are the most of the feminist organizations liberal feminist then and pro-transgender ideology in Croatia?
I'd say there are many radical feminists and radically leaning feminists, but they don't have this venue where they can publish, and I guess they don't want to publicly express their opinions because, you know, we are the only organization that is doing so, and we are constantly attacked and demonized for it. And, you know, recently it happened that Center for Women's Studies selected a new executive director, and this is the very young girl. She's like 24. She has a really admirable CV, but she was very viciously attacked when she was selected for executive director, because 6 months ago she posted on Facebook Jk Rowling's tweet about menstruators, like women aren't menstruators, you know, and she was so viciously attacked, and it was like 10 articles against her, against us, because they immediately connected Femrevolt with her and with Center for Women's Studies, and all sorts of conspiracy theories aroused from it. It was really crazy, and we were denounced even as fascists. So I think it would be a good move from our side to become formal organization, so that we can legally fight these accusations.
Do you have any support in Croatia or in other nearby countries, or are you very isolated?
Well, actually, we have support from individuals from other organizations. There are other radical feminists besides us, but not from the systemic level. I mean, there are no other organizations in Croatia that could support us, but we have a very good collaboration with some leftist organizations from Serbia, like Marx 21, and there are rising more and more other radical feminist organizations, like we have a Female Solidarity in Serbia. So I think the situation is getting better, but the more we are getting stronger, the stronger are getting also attacks on us. But we are also we are explicitly a leftist group, and we collaborate with a lot of leftist organizations, and this is our political framework we like to work with. Yeah. So when they attack us that we are right wingers or Nazis, it's really absurd, and everybody sees it clearly that we are not. We are actually very much opposed to that.
I've been reading Frederick Engels, who was a Marxist, obviously, working together with Karl Marx about the materialist conception of history. Just because it's interesting, and it links with some of your groups in Croatia, and as you say in Serbia, the Marx 21. Can you explain that? Because not everybody understands that materialist conception.
Well, it is our premise that that capital is a form of patriarchy, not vice versa, as many socialist feminists say. And we are we lean very much onto Friedrich Engels' notion that women are a class. That's his thesis. He's the first one that made this thesis, and we base almost all our analysis on this. And we have very good collaboration even with Croatian leftists, and during the past year, we thought that because of the lockdown and everything, we won't be able to be so much active and go out, but we even had elections for parliamentary elections, and I was a candidate on the Socialist Workers' Party's list. So I made like a political statement on behalf of radical feminism, and I put a whole, not me, but Femrevolt as organization, through me put a whole radical feminist program, electoral program for election. So we derived 15 points for women's liberation, And I think it was very important, and everybody was introduced to our actual politics, so they can't input like we want to exclude transgender persons from anything or anything like that. We're not against trans people. We want their liberation just as we want women's liberation, but we just have different explanation of gender and what's its origin and how it affects people and society.
Yeah, and do you get, if you talk to people in Croatia, are you getting quite a lot of support or not so much?
Oh, well, when I talk to just, ordinary people, they understand very easily what we are saying. It's just a matter of common sense. But when you talk to this political queer Marxist leftist clique, it's very hard. It's almost impossible. And because they are so detached from the ordinary people, I don't think they actually can have much political influence over anything. They can only lobby in these small groups with the established political parties, but even then their influence can be so strong because we have moderate conservatives in government and very strong Christian right. So their activism is actually very, very limited.
Yeah. How about self-ID law and the change in definition of woman? How's that going in Croatia? Well, I'm saying as if it's good. It would be very bad, but what's happening?
Regarding that, it's allowed, but transgender persons, they have to prove that they're living in the opposite gender for 2 years. And then they have to go to some commission to be for that to be affirmed. It's not so easy for them. It's actually rather hard. I don't think we have more than 50 or tops 100 transgender persons so in Croatia. So I don't think there's too much to say about that. Of course, to me, the much more diabolical issue is with minors taking hormone treatment, and there's been cases like 12-year-olds, and but it's not even in media. It's not published, so it's really hard to speak about it. And we are also not the mainstream feminist organizations, so nobody is asking us even what we think about it. I can write about it on the Facebook. We have like 7,000 followers, our page, but we still have very limited audience.
So we're now going to go to Kathleen Lowrey, who from Canada, and Raine McLeod from Canada. Kathleen is Associate Professor of Anthropology in the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Canada. She's Women's Human Rights Country Contact for Canada, along with Raine McLeod. And Kathleen, you're going to give us an update on your work situation, I think, about what's happening in your in Canada. So over to you, Kathleen.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll be quick. And I should say we actually have in Canada, we also have Ghislaine Gendron, who's the Francophone. So we're a complicated country. Anyway, so it's very kind. I'm actually not going to, Raine is going to be speaking about Canada in general. It was very kind. I was invited just to talk about my personal situation really quickly. So some of you may know that last March, I was dismissed from a position within my university. It was just an administrative position, so I'm fine. I still have my salary, I still have my job, but I was dismissed from an administrative position because students complained that I was a gender critical feminist, that I was a TERF, so I was harming students, and the administration got very scared and it dismissed me. So this made kind of a splash in the news in Canada and some other places in June after a colleague of mine wrote about it. And so the update about what's happening, I have to say, in one sense, not much. So my faculty association sort of reluctantly took on my case that they're supposed to defend academic freedom for professors. It was clear from the start. At first, the case was so egregious, and I didn't do it secretly. I told the people I was meeting with that I was going to be recording our meetings. So I recorded our meetings, and the things that they said were just, it was so obvious I was being dismissed for my views, not because I had been mean to students or anything like that. So at first, my faculty association did take my case, but it's been very foot draggy about it. And then they contacted me in the fall to say that they had gotten some legal advice that suggested they couldn't pursue my case any further. And they would show me the legal advice, but I had to promise not to show it to anyone else. And I said I couldn't agree to those terms because I wanted to write about, I was like, well, I want to write about what's happened to me from a feminist perspective. So if you show me the legal advice, I'm going to tell people about it. So if you don't want me to tell people about it, don't show it to me. And I think that kind of freaked them out. And so they said, oh, we're actually going to go and find some more legal advice and we'll get back to you. And I said, okay, get back to me when you have more legal advice. And actually when Jocelyn contacted me this week, I thought, oh, I'll write and ask them what's going on. And so I wrote and said, what's going on? And they said, we have nothing to report to you. And I said, oh, well, I was just asking because the Women's Human Rights Campaign has invited me to update them at their international webinar. And then they wrote back and they said, but your case is very complicated. And in fact, my case is not complicated. My case is a straightforward case of people complaining about my views, which, under the rules of faculty contracts, that's just not supposed to amount to anything. So my case is not complicated, but what can we conclude from this? Because of course, in one way, my case pertains only to me. But in a larger sense, I think it's the thing that we see again and again, which is so many of these things happen by stealth, and they happen so that we're put on the back foot. So if my faculty association decides not to represent me, my only other option would be to hire a lawyer, which of course I can't afford to do. I'm just an ordinary person. And it's interesting that I think this gender identity ideology constantly puts people who oppose it in the position of, you're the one who has to hire a lawyer. So instead of them, in many cases, instead of going through formal channels, they sort of punish people in back channels, and then it's you who has to pursue formal channels for redress. Of course, they do also go straight to the law, but they do that in these kind of stealthy ways that you only find out later. Wait, the law says what now? Like men are being housed in women's prisons? Like, how did that happen? There was no public consultation. And I know Raine will talk about this. That's certainly been the case in Canada. We've had major legislative changes to kind of no public discussion, no media coverage. All of this kind of stealth and coercion and silence, we see it again and again. And of course, the thing that works best against it is exactly what we're doing here. So it was wonderful to be able to say the Women's Human Rights Campaign, which is an international organization, is interested in my case, because that clearly rattled my faculty association. And to the extent that we're in a position to kind of rattle people who are doing things under the radar and just expecting us to all live with a fait accompli, we have to push back. Before I finish, I just wanted to say the other kind of interesting thing about having been canceled. One has been, it's been amazing. I've met so many amazing feminist women because of it. It's actually been a great experience. But the other thing that's happened is I'm now kind of a depository for secret messages from students who are either like, P.S., I think you're awesome, or I agree with you and I'm afraid to say that I agree with you. So all of us know there's a lot of support out there among people who are really not in a position to speak publicly. I will say I've been very disappointed in my colleagues. There's been dead silence from them. And I'm not gonna lie, I have regular fantasies about how embarrassed they're gonna be 10 years from now. But I don't know, we have to get from here to there. but we're doing what we can.
So immediately after the launch in October, we had a lot of interested women who wanted to participate. I think that the biggest problem in Canada right now is just the vastness of our country. By virtue of Canada being so big, we have provinces and territories that are having to run meetings together because there's kind of a deficit of women who are basically, they feel really alone, particularly in the eastern provinces where the population is incredibly small. So there's like one or maybe two or three of them out there, and they could be separated by an entire island, essentially. So BC and the Yukon are running their meetings together. I think there's one woman in the Yukon. Hi, Tracy. Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and then occasionally with Alberta going forward, that are running together. Ontario is running alone, Quebec, because there's a lot of action out in Ontario and Quebec. And then Newfoundland and Nova Scotia are running together, basically, the East Coast. So we do have a few places without coordinators in Canada. So hopefully we can find women in places like PEI and the Northwest Territories and in Nunavut that are willing to be coordinators in the future. The provincial meetings happen monthly, and then I host a national meeting with all the coordinators at the end of the month, so we can talk about all of the work that's being done and the future plans of the individual groups. So in BC and the Yukon, they've been super busy. Their December meeting, they hosted at least like a dozen women, and there was a talk by legendary feminist Lee Lakeman, who is one of the founders of the much maligned and slandered Vancouver Rape Relief and Women's Shelter. They also discussed strategy and the work that BC feminists have been doing, including setting up a Slack space so that they can talk all together kind of more informally. And then they're talking about doing maybe a WordPress so they can do something for blogging or updating purposes. Alberta have been contacting our MPs about Bill C6, which is the Canadian conversion therapy bill that includes gender identity and expression, and it basically guarantees affirmation-only therapy for all Canadians. Previously, it was just for minors, but the only amendments that they've made are to add gender expression, because it was previously only gender identity, and to basically throw a net over the entire population of Canada, not just children, which is also just worse. So Alberta are producing a package of talking points for members' use during meetings. We're also forming a subcommittee to work on a private member's bill regarding sex not being a protected characteristic in the Alberta Human Rights Act. So here in Alberta, I'm in Calgary. So here in Alberta, the Alberta Human Rights Act only protects gender identity and expression. Sex did previously appear, but it was removed in the 90s because sex was considered to be a verb and gender was considered to be the noun. So that was gross and infuriating. Saskatchewan and Manitoba are holding their meetings together. At their January meeting, they discussed the Kirabel decision. You guys in the UK are just killing it. Like, it's bad that all this work has to be done, but the fact that you guys are setting precedents is hugely important, particularly since we're both countries in the Commonwealth. The stuff that happens in the UK is going to be hugely influential on the things that are happening in Canada. So Lisa Bildy from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms also spoke about her experiences. She's based in Vancouver, and she actually spoke at she was one of the women who testified at the Bill C6 hearings. If you can, she killed it. She was just amazing. She knows exactly what she's talking about. She raised some incredible points. And then one of the MPs, Randall Garrison, actually basically just called her a transphobe, and it was just, everybody's just cheesed. That same guy actually said that detransition was a false narrative. So they're just doing a really poor job in Ottawa right now. So Lisa Bildy also spoke about the current state of legal education, given the influence of gender ideology. They've changed some things in BC that any lawyer has to, when they stand up, they have to introduce themselves using their pronouns and the pronouns of their client as well. She's spoken about her concerns about the rights of parents and children being violated, regarding secrecy in schools and stuff like that. And she indicated that she was keeping her eyes open for cases related to Bill C-16. In February, Heather Mason, who is a women's prison advocate, she's amazing. She has videos all over YouTube. She's been writing about this. She's been talking about this at length. She's incredible. So she'll be speaking with that group in February. And right now, there is a push right now to talk to our elected officials about the men who are being housed in women's prisons. Women are being sexually assaulted and harassed by the men in the prisons, and the government doesn't seem to care. So especially in light of the news coming out of the UK about the number of female offenders doubling in the last 4 years, it's obviously important that this be addressed as soon as possible. Our statistics are at risk, not to mention the imprisoned female population that is disproportionately Indigenous and who have a disproportionate history of addiction and sexual abuse. Really talk to Heather Mason. She's on Twitter, she's on Facebook, and she's got a lot of things on YouTube. She's definitely someone to support and to look out for. And if you're in Canada, send her stuff to your MPs. Send your stuff to them, because they really, really need to be more aware of the damage that's being done, because it's catastrophic. And there's going to be, the only way that we're going to be able to address this in the future is if we have just a list of victims. And we don't want a list of victims. We would like people to be proactive instead of reactive on this, because it's women who are in danger, and it's children in these women's prisons who are in danger. There's prisons in Ontario that have women, mother-child programs that are being housed with sex offenders who are like actual baby rapists. It's bad. So we're working really hard. Distance is the hardest thing, but we're underestimating the number of women who are interested across the country. That's basically it.
We're now going to go to Angela C. Wild from France and the UK. She's a political artist, radical lesbian feminist activist and writer based in the UK. She's a founding member of Get the Hell Out UK and a creator of Wild Women Workshop. And so Angela will tell us mostly about art and activism. And so over to you, and welcome, Angela.
So I wanted to talk about the link between art and activism, because as an artist myself, very early on, art and activism have always been naturally going hand in hand. And I just wanted to kind of give a different perspective. I noticed that some form of activism are very valued in our movement, such as academic work or lobbying the government for change of laws. These are really held in high esteem, and very often the aspect that is overlooked because it's considered less important or maybe soft is cultural or artistic activism. And I wanted to do this presentation to talk about why, in my perspective, it's in fact a very important aspect of our struggle. There's going to be some slides, so if you're bored of watching me, you can look at some art. I'm talking about art as human creative cultural production, and I include in this visual art, such as painting, sculpture, architecture, music, theater, film, dance, other performing arts, literature, fiction and poetry, interactive media, design and craft. And I wanted to make the point that I do not differentiate here between art with a capital A and art and craft, because most art with a capital A in art history is male art and is placed on pedestal by male critic to basically promote a male ideology. And in opposition, craft is considered women's work, is not placed on a pedestal, not generally given any cultural importance as artifact. Because it's considered women's work, it's being scorned. So I'm raising this point because I think it's our job as feminists to challenge this division and hierarchy, but also because I think one of the reasons that maybe we generally do not value the work of feminist artists is on the same level of academia, for example, or lobbying groups, is because of this hierarchy. It's also possible that we misunderstand and underestimate the role and power that image play in the shaping of our world. So there's different ways that patriarchy functions, and I've been looking at the chat and there was some interesting discussions about that. We can consider that patriarchy is a network of intertwined structures and that they work hand in hand to keep men in control of the world. So on one hand, one of these structures is academia, the production of ideas, and it's a crucial aspect of this system. The other hand, of course, is the legal system and the way it enforces these patriarchal ideas in the law. The cultural and artistic institutions, such as the media, the art world, broadly, its role is to propagate patriarchal ideology to the masses, to us. And patriarchy, as we know, is in full control of the main mean of cultural production and propagation. So we know that the TV, the media in general, the newspapers, the art world, the publishing industry, the fashion industry, the music industry, the film industry, certainly the pornography industry, they're all industry controlled by men, and they are used to spread patriarchal propaganda 24/7, and the media machine never stops. Which means that we all live in a world that is saturated with images. And in the West, the average person is now estimated to encounter a few thousand adverts every single day. And if you add to that images in newspaper, the internet, and so on, the films you might watch, like we're talking about an incredible amount of visual information that we are bombarded with every single day, and we integrate and internalize every single day. These images are mostly created by powerful patriarchal machines. They are designed with a purpose and an agenda, whether to sell us a product, an ideology, or both. So make no mistake that no image that you see in this world is neutral. And what really strikes me is that it's part of the curriculum of every school, at least in the Western world, to teach children to read and write words, books. And if we're very lucky, we get to a bit of critical thinking too. But it's not very common that schools will provide a systematic visual literacy course. We are not generally taught how to read an image, how to understand how it was made, what this image says, how it functions, how it was created, and how it is received by an audience. And this lack leaves us globally, I think, rather powerless in front of the media, because in contrast, the patriarchal media machine know very well how to construct an image, how to convey a message, and how to manipulate an audience and our emotion in order to reach their aim, which is to sell us an ideology. And to take a specific example of the discussion that we are interested in here, gender, transgenderism, you might have noticed that not every aspect of the trans activist fight against lesbians and women is law-based or academic. In fact, trans activists spend a really incredible amount of time and energy and money infiltrating the media, the art world, to make sure that their ideology is everywhere, there also. And in the last few years, we've seen how most media outlets have very one-sidedly reported on transgenderism, erasing the voices of women of dissent. We've seen the rise of the trans celebrity culture, the transitioning of very visible actors or actresses, or sometimes their children, which is a phenomenon that raised the trans ideology's visibility exponentially due to these people's fame. So in many ways, this constant bombarding of pro-trans ideology via the media feels like an endless cultural tsunami. And I think that should give us a clue that images are indeed a very important mean for patriarchy to change mentalities without having to change the law. It doesn't mean they don't change the law as well, but both things happen. So equally for dissidents, such as feminists, culture and art can be a very important activist tool that we have at our disposal to fight oppression. So let's go back to the classic, like look at this amazing picture. I wanted to show some art from the suffragettes, because to me, we're in front of a movement that really clearly understands the power of visual and art in the creation of a political and cultural force of dissent. Suffragettes were fully exploiting the power of art in all its form, not only in the form of visual art and illustration. In fact, art was involved in every aspect of their activism. Just more example here, as you can see. From medals for activists who were jailed, those who survived force feeding, tea sets, board games, banners, astonishing procession, display of suffragette fashion, and highly staged performances. Suffragettes had their own newspapers and magazine. They created jewelry, stage plays, music hymns. They used very ingeniously and illegally the art of defacing coins for political purposes. And overall, I think this created a very visible, very recognizable and appealing visual identity that benefited their struggle. I know some have criticized the suffragette image to be a corporate visual identity, but I think the suffragette's identity was really a genius move. And the sign of a movement that takes itself seriously enough to believe in women's culture in every aspect, and bold enough to create an entire culture centered on its needs. So for us today, to take us back, we are in front of a big power imbalance in the access of cultural production and broadcast, a very much David and Goliath situation. And in this context, feminist art often acts as a grain of sand in the patriarchal cogs of the media machine, a way to bring our message, guerrilla style, and to disrupt the narrative imposed by the media with the means that we have. So a few examples for you, sticker woman, and some badges, some stickers. I think feminist art is often hilarious. Humor is a great way to convey a political message, and only men think that radical feminists don't have a sense of humor anyway. And also it's good to highlight the absurdity of the situation we're in. This example here shows ways to fight for our vocabulary, our rights to self-definition, highlight the extent to which we can speak, use certain words or not, and of course, our ability to think beyond the patriarchal censorship. This is a great way to expand what women are allowed to say or to think. And acts and objects of defiance, such as stickers or badges, as tiny as they are, because we're talking about a few centimeters here, they really help us highlight the fragility of the patriarchal system, who cannot tolerate even the smallest expression of dissent, or it might just collapse. And this is why patriarchal backlash is always appearing so out of proportion, what we now name cancel culture. So with art, we can convey a political message, we can rally support around a particular cause, we can educate or raise awareness. So I've just put a few examples here that have been very successful across the years. And we can also use art to provoke, to put the backlash under focus, which is a great way to raise awareness. And this is one of my favorite banners, Wrong Side of History, My Arse, really brilliantly take this idiom that is used against us and create this classic of the gender critical art, I think. So obviously our role is to take the piss, to show the utmost form of disrespect to patriarchy. And this is where comics are a particularly relevant form of art, and particularly very often hilarious. So here is an example from Sandy Draws Badly, Stella, which you've met I think a few weeks ago, and The Art of Dissent, who was active in 2012-13. In all these, social media play a great role. So do demonstration and women's gathering and conferences when we can get there. And feminism, for many of us, in that aspect, is not just a lobbying exercise, it's our lives, it's how we speak to each other, the vocabulary we use together, how we work collectively, how we bond together against the oppressor, the resistance strategy we put in place. So visual culture has a crucial part to play in this. In fact, I think it's the role of the artist activist to capture this emerging culture and to create a visual vocabulary for it. It is mainly to create rallying feminist iconography and female-centered visual archetypes, the visual codes that we recognize each other with, sometimes secret codes, only those aware of the debate will understand. So here you've got a Hogwarts jumper. So what is this? A Harry Potter fan? Is it a secret turf? And everybody on each side of the debate will be questioning this. And I think it's quite interesting. A lot of this work has also been about celebrating the voices of women who have spoken up. There's been so many, I couldn't put everybody in, but so much work to raise visibility and promote our voices. And all this creates a subculture. These are crucial aspects of feminism, cultural self-defense and resistance against the patriarchy and against this particular transgender threat. So art is of course a way to see the world as much as it is a way to change the world. The role of the artist is to create solution we need for the problem we face today. It is to have a vision that another world is possible. It is to imagine this feminist new world we would like to live in. So to tie this with some of the recent conversation that's been had here the last few weeks, some of us say, let us not ally with the right. We also very often say, let us not ally with the left either. What we mean is, let us not ally with men. Don't expect anything from men. Stop asking for less oppression, special favors, more right, a bit less violence. There's something, in my opinion, quite self-defeating into asking the oppressor for permission, which is inherently what lobbying work is all about. and also I'd question whether it's efficient and effective. I think activism can take different shapes. And in the spirit of some of the work in the second wave, the feminists who created those women-only spaces, such as Red Crisis Center and shelters, with no funding and no mail approval, we could also consider that we can focus on ourselves, again, as women, regroup with other women and start building what we need instead of asking men authorization for funding or simply to ask them to be nicer. Because we don't change a system by trying to change it, but we change a system by building without it. When things seem the most impossible, when our aims seem to be the most unreachable, art is a great way, maybe the most appropriate way, to dream this vision of a different world we could create if we would just stop asking men permission for everything. I hope this little talk inspires you to take your pencil, your watercolors, your spray cans, or your embroidery kit and express your feminist creativity. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, I've got a direct question for you, Angela. Are you the woman who made the T-shirt that's Jk Rowling liked?
Yes.
Can you tell us what happened with that and how many extra orders you got and what sort of the countries that you asked to send?
Well, basically, Jk Rowling bought my T-shirt. I didn't know she bought it because she probably used another name, and then she tweeted it.
What was on your T-shirt? Can you tell us?
This witch doesn't burn. And obviously she was making a reference of the fact that she was cancelled and witch hunted and resisting that. She just tweeted it. I was absolutely unaware of it. And she just turned a profitable business into a business that I can now live on. That's what happened to me, which is absolutely fantastic because it's really like challenging to be a working, functioning artist as it is. But if you've got radical feminist view, it's like commercial suicide. It's really difficult. And what I see through that is that it's absolutely amazing that we are starting to rebuild a feminist culture. That is just, to me, one of the things that is happening, that is showing me that women are starting to really retrust each other and build this culture. And, you know, like, for example, there's a Radical Notion magazine coming that, you know, we are rebuilding our own network of communication and our own art. And this is really great. So through Jk Rowling, I've had orders from Singapore, from Russia, from Poland, from Mexico, from all over the world. This has been absolutely like phenomenal, really fantastic, life-changing.
Angela, when you made that T-shirt, were you a little bit thinking about the Harry Potter books, or was it completely nothing to do with them and it just happened to? Were you sort of slightly, or was it just happened to be lucky that?
No, what I'm always like, for me, the witch iconography is very important. Obviously, iconography as a feminist, and you know. I like Harry Potter, but it was not directly linked. And when I designed it, which was a few years ago now, Jk Rowling had not fully come out as critical of the trans ideology. So no, there was no direct link.
So my final question for you, Angela, is: are you now friends with Jk Rowling?
No. No.
You got her phone number?
Very private. I don't know. I don't have any other contact than Facebook, but she's been incredibly supportive, and you know, credit to her. I think she knows exactly what she's doing, and I think when she did this also, it was amazing that she, you know, I think she knows what's on my page. I think she knows the kind of content I have, and I think by sharing this quite tame design, she also opened the door for women to say, well, I agree with her, but also none of the stuff that I produce is offensive, they're all factual. And this really opened the ability for women to just speak, you know, and not be silent and say, actually, I don't want to do pronouns, and yes, it's misogyny. And so, yeah, that's quite fantastic.